Hey everybody, today I'm out in England driving one of those small and practical vehicles that we will never get in North America. This is a 2021 Volkswagen Sharan. It has actually been discontinued for 2022 because Volkswagen is pushing towards more electrification in Europe, and that means that their larger, small 7-seat vehicle is on the chopping blocks. This is essentially a supersized Volkswagen Golf, and that's why this is absolutely fantastic and the kind of vehicle that I wish we had more of in North America because of its inherent practicality. Let's start out with the styling. Obviously, this looks a lot like the Volkswagen Golf. We have very similar headlight shapes, grille shape right there, big Volkswagen logo in the middle. These are halogen headlights in this particular model. Keep in mind, this is not produced for 2023 anywhere in the world. Big Volkswagen logo right there in the middle with the radar adaptive cruise control sensor in the middle. We have fairly skinny tires on this model. These are 215 60R16s, so definitely suitable for some rougher roads. But as you move around to the side, you'll notice again the relationship between this and the Volkswagen Golf. It's not just the platform, there's also a lot of Golf in this style. We have a fairly upright back end here, making this very practical. And then of course we have minivan style sliding doors, which really add to the practicality inside. Of course, makes getting in and out in tight parking spots in Europe really easy. At 74 inches wide, this is certainly wider than a Volkswagen Golf, but it is definitely narrower than a number of compact crossovers in the US. And you could get this in some years with all-wheel drive. So it's not just a big Golf, it's a big Golf all-wheel drive with a big cargo area behind this hatch in the rear. We'll take a look at that in a bit. Big Volkswagen logo back there in the rear. It does not hide a backup camera in this particular trim. Big LED lights back here in the rear, and again, a very, very vertical hatch. You can get a hitch in this model because you can tow about 2,000 pounds when properly equipped. For those of you that are wondering exactly where I am, here's a little bit of a teaser, or I guess a little bit of a puzzle. Name that castle down there in the comments section below, and if you get that right, you could actually find this particular short stay, cute little cottage available on one of their websites to rent for yourself next time you're out in the Cotswolds, perhaps renting a Volkswagen Sharan. Under the fairly compact hood, you'll find one of 3 different engines. There's a 2-liter turbo diesel that's probably going to be found in most models in Europe that will produce up to 175 horsepower depending on the trim and the version you select. Then we have this engine found in a lot of rental cars like this one. This is a rental from Alamo, of course. This is a 1.4-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine producing about 147 horsepower. I think in its final year it ended up at 150 horsepower. Now, there was a slightly more powerful Sharan that had a 2-liter turbo that produced just under 200 horsepower, and you can get this equipped with a DSG, but of course, this one is the 6-speed manual. When talking about fuel economy, there is something you should know. I get a lot of folks writing in about, my goodness, I was in Ireland or I was in England and I had a fantastic insert whatever European car here, and it got 40 miles per gallon or 38 miles per gallon. Remember that the British gallon is larger than the American gallon, considerably larger, about 25% bigger. And as a result, this model has been averaging for me out here in England, driving it around mostly country roads like out here in the Cotswolds, averaging about 30 miles per gallon. In North America, that would be down lower in the 20s because our gallon is smaller. Also, highway speeds tend to be a little bit faster in some areas like in Texas, so certainly keep that in mind. This is pretty efficient with the 1.4-liter turbo, but it's not up there in the 40s or 50s. Now it's time for the moment you have all been waiting for. It's time to get the Volkswagen Sharan out on the wrong side of the road. Of course, I'm sure some of you will argue that this is the right side of the road, but it is literally not the right side of the road. So we'll just go with that. At any rate, the first thing you'll notice really out here on some of these really narrow roads is that the Sharan, even though it is fairly small by North American standards, is definitely large for standards out here in this country. You will certainly notice that something like an S-Max is going to be wider if you are shopping for rental cars in Great Britain or Northern Ireland or any of the countries here in Europe where the streets are pretty tiny, but it is definitely more convenient to drive around than a Volkswagen Transit. In fact, at the rental car agency, I had the choice of this or an S-Max or a Galaxy. Galaxy definitely feels on the large side, or even a full-size Transit. And as you can see, a Transit would have taken up the vast majority of this roadway because that's exactly the same Transit that we get in North America, of course with some different engines under the hood. But speaking about engines, obviously this is not going to do anything quickly. If we come to more or less a complete stop and then we try and accelerate aggressively, the first thing you'll notice is that second gear is a little bit worn out in this model. The engagement isn't quite right. The next thing you'll notice is that 0 to 60 happens in about 10.5 seconds if you get the slowest diesel, about 9.5 seconds if you get the most powerful diesel. In this model, I clocked 9 seconds 0 to 60, not terribly swift. That will go up to maybe about 8 seconds, maybe a little under 8 seconds if you get the 2-liter turbo and the dual clutch automatic transmission. So not overly swift, but for North America, this is certainly something that Volkswagen could rectify, or again, insert your car company here. Stellantis, of course, the conglomerate that owns Chrysler and Jeep and Fiat, etc. They have some interesting and very tasty French models these days that they could very easily adapt to North America, somewhat similar to this, and you could stuff a bigger engine under the hood. Definitely not a problem. Stopping distance, also a little bit on the long side, 125 feet, but not unreasonable for North America. Handling ability, you would assume with 215 with tires that this is not going to handle the best, but in fact, it feels pretty decent out on these winding roads out here in the Cotswolds. It's not really going to feel like a Volkswagen GTI, but it is surprisingly planted. And this suspension setup, even though it's not the most elegant suspension in the rear, does a really good job soaking up bumps and dips and the really big potholes that have been out on these roads. This is really kind of a fun minivan to drive. If you compare this to a Honda Odyssey or a Sienna or a Chrysler Pacifica, etc., this is quite simply more fun to drive than any of those options available in North America. And of course, this is the same formula that we saw in the Mazda 5, if you remember back to those days. But the Mazda 5 looked kind of funny, to be honest. Always to my eye, it looked peculiar. Not quite as ugly as the first generation Volkswagen Sharan, mind you. That was really not a looker. But if you make them attractive, I think there could be a market. Again, I think this is actually a decent looking vehicle. Also pretty decent is the cabin quietness. Even if I were to put this in second gear and just rev the nuts off this tiny little 1.4, you don't really hear that much engine noise in the cabin, and you don't really hear that much wind noise or road noise either. I wouldn't be surprised if this actually was a little bit quieter if I were ever able to test one in North America versus the average minivan in North America. This is actually honestly a little quieter than the last Volkswagen Tiguan that I drove. And we don't find the squeaks and rattles that you might expect a minivan to have at 60,000 miles in here either, likely because of the smaller and tighter body structure. So we didn't get any squeaking or rattling around the sliding doors or the big hatch in the rear, even on broken and uneven pavement. Now, fuel economy, as I was saying earlier, it's not going to be as high as you might think. If I scroll over to my average fuel economy meter here over the last 380 miles here, we've been averaging 28.6 miles per gallon. Now remember, this is imperial miles per gallon we're talking here. If I were to translate this to US miles per gallon, we'd end up at 22.8. 23 miles per gallon is not the best, but it's not the worst. It's certainly more efficient than something like a Honda Odyssey or a Chrysler Pacifica with the regular engines in those lineups, but not as efficient as a Pacifica hybrid or, of course, the Sienna, which is all hybrid all the time. One last test. Let's see how it does on this roundabout. Round and round we go. Where we stop, nobody knows. Well, at least the locals don't know where we're stopping. But as you can see, it acquits itself pretty nicely. It feels pretty tidy, pretty easy to maneuver around in tight areas. To be honest, the only thing that would make this even more epic as a European itty-bitty 3-row vehicle would be a middle seat right here in the front row. That could be a bit of a squeeze because, again, that second row is actually positioned a little bit to my right versus the seat that I'm driving in here right now. The front two seats are about as close together as they are in a Volkswagen Golf. I have a slightly wider area to my right. The passenger has a slightly wider area to his or her left over there, but everything in the way back is smushed over to the side to give this the most room possible. And for me at least, that's what makes this so entertaining. Now let's take a look at the inside so you can understand why this is such a practical format of vehicle. Up front, we have an interior that definitely feels a lot like a last generation Volkswagen. We have the very similar infotainment system right here in the dashboard, very similar dashboard design. Convenient cargo area right up there in the lid. You can see there's an Alamo contract in there. We then have climate controls, very similar to what we find in the Volkswagen Golf lineup. And of course, 6-speed manual transmission shifter right there in the middle. Lots of stuff rolling around because of course this is a rental car. On the driver's side, you can see that this is a fairly worn steering wheel. It does have a leather wrap, which I really like. Controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on this side, controls for the infotainment system, and that small multifunction screen over there on that side. This one has about 60,000 miles on it, but it's actually aged pretty well. Over on this side, on the driver's side over here, for England, of course, we have the controls for the side view mirrors, window switches, power child locks, which I really like. So you can enable them or disable them from here. Of course, auto headlights and headlamp level adjuster right there. Back on the center section, we have the electric parking brake, auto brake hold, 2 decently sized cup holders, a small storage area there in the middle. I have a USB-C to USB-A adapter, and then we have the ratchet style armrest that I really like in some modern Volkswagens as well. After a week of driving out here in England, I found the driver's seat to be quite comfortable, just as you'd expect, but it's an interesting mix of things. We have a power recline, power 4-way lumbar support, but manual slide for the seat and manual height adjustment. And you can really get this seat pretty high, because as far as headroom goes in the first and second rows, this is closer to a full-size SUV in North America. We don't have a moonroof in this model, but I have lots of headroom left, even though this seat is nowhere near the bottom of its travel. So definitely a roomy front seat. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the back seat. With that seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I'll go ahead and slide the door open to hop in the second row. In the back seat, the first thing you'll notice is that I have the front passenger seat folded. Also, we have cute little airline style trays that fold out from the front seats. That's obviously really cargo practical. You won't find that feature in any minivan in North America. I have a little tray table over here on this seat as well. The other thing you're going to notice is how far apart these 3 seats are. I'm actually sitting a little bit to the right of the driver in the front there. That means that if I come over here to the middle, this seat is shockingly wide. It's separate from the others as well. This one slides forward and backward in its own right, separate from the outboard seats. And then scooting over here to this side, you'll notice again, I'm actually a little bit offset versus the front passenger, really giving this a very roomy feel. I'm not clear how this would pass North American side impact tests, because that means, of course, I am a little bit further out. But you notice the body of the Sharan actually gets a little bit wider at this point, making this portion of the passenger compartment wider than in the front seats, really adding to the practicality. Design-wise, the one narrow miss back here is you cannot leave a child seat latch anchored into place. This seat moves almost in a way where you could do that, but not quite. You do have to tilt and slide it forward like that. Now, you can unbuckle this middle seat belt. It does come out of the ceiling, which I find a bit of a bummer, but I think I'm okay with that as far as the practicality goes. Getting back into the rear, you have to tilt and slide that seat forward, then you can pull it back in place. Now, this third row is a 2-seat only third row. Now, if you come in for a closer look, this third row's bottom seat cushion is actually higher off the ground than we find in a Toyota Highlander in North America. Despite the Sharan being about 191 inches long, so significantly shorter on the outside than that Highlander. We also have combined legroom that is pretty similar to the Highlander. So if you come around this way, you'll notice that my legs, they're actually really close to this seat back, but not quite touching there. There is just a little bit of room. And if you move the front seats forward like this, you can get quite a lot of legroom back here in the third row. The third row headrests go quite high because, of course, you need to do that if you're a 6-foot-tall person back here. This is a surprisingly comfortable third row versus a Toyota Highlander or a Honda Pilot. This is going to be a little bit less comfortable than the Pilot, a little bit more comfortable, I think, than the current generation Toyota Highlander or something like the Kia Sorento, something on the smaller side of the midsize 3-row segment. Now, because obviously a lot of folks will have the back seats folded a lot, we have cup holders back here, but everything is hard plastic in this area, and there's a place for a roller cargo cover to go back here. You can get the Sharan with either 2 rows, so seats 5, or you can get the 7-seat version or a 6-seat version with either the bench seats right here in the middle that split like that or separate captain's chairs. Now, for added cargo practicality, it's not just that front passenger seat that folds flat, the second row folds flat. And you notice the reason the seat bottom cushion moves in that unusual way is because this collapses down like that to really maximize cargo capacity. Volkswagen has done a really good job with the engineering in this vehicle. It's pretty impressive. And again, kind of sad that we don't get it in North America. Now let's take a look at how the third row looks from back here. Again, big cargo hatch in the back. It opens fairly high, so it's 6 feet tall. I actually have more room than I have in something like a Dodge Durango as far as the clearance above that goes. Back here in the cargo area, we find just over 11 cubic feet of storage space, but remember that in Europe and North America, they don't measure cargo space the same way. In Europe, the specification is usually the number of small, specifically sized boxes that you can jam into the cargo area, and obviously you can't go all the way up to the ceiling. So in America, this cargo area would probably be measured a little bit larger than it is, but you can fit about 422-inch roller bags back here pretty comfortably. We've actually been wandering all around England, 5 of us in this vehicle with all of our luggage and carry-on bags, etc., quite comfortably in this 3-row vehicle. Of course, most of the time, at least one of these back seats has been folded. Now we should talk about how they fold. You'll notice you have to put down the headrests like that, and then if you come in close, you'll notice that the seat bottom cushion flips forward and then fills up the 3rd row floor area there where the feet would go in that footwell zone. Then the seat folds in that manner with the seat back cushion going down into the floor. Let's see if we can get this to do that. There we go. And then that flips forward, giving you a flat cargo area. In this configuration, we have well over 40 cubic feet of storage space. By the numbers, I'm guessing it's probably around 50 cubic feet. So honestly, a little bit better than we find in a Ford Edge, which is a mid-size vehicle. Then moving over to this side yet again, you notice we have the ability to fold the 2nd row seats completely flat, giving you lots of extra cargo area. And if everything is folded flat back here, you'll have over 85 cubic feet of cargo capacity. And speaking of cargo storage, although not quite Chrysler's stow and go, we do have little storage cubbies just in front of the rear seat outboard passengers. Now again, unfortunately, the Volkswagen Sharan is never coming to North America, and it's no longer on sale in Europe either, but this is exactly the kind of car that I would love to see more of in North America. You can get it with all-wheel drive, which is what a lot of Americans are interested in. Sure, the ground clearance is still going to be about 6 inches, so it's not going to be a crossover. It's not going to be like a Volkswagen Taos or a Tiguan. But speaking of the Tiguan, this is priced pretty much like a Tiguan in Europe. So you could get something like this for about $30,000 starting. This would likely be, if it ever came to North America or something like it, could come to North America for the price of, say, a Kia Sorento. And you'd have a lot more practical room in the 3rd row, more cargo room back there, a more usable and practical interior. Again, sadly, this is the kind of vehicle that we just aren't seeing much of in North America. Even the upcoming Volkswagen ID.Buzz, even though it's going to be electric and have that skateboard platform, is probably not going to be quite as practical and pragmatic as something like this particular Volkswagen. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below, and what practical European car would you love to see come to North America? I'll see all of you later.